Stand by and I'll get us going live here. Okay, Roger.
Welcome everyone to this committee meeting for the National Science Board's Committee on Strategy. We refer to it as CS. And I hope you hear a lot of us, those of you who are the new members, Willie and others that will join us. My name is Roger Beachy, and I chair the committee on strategy. Our members, other members of the committee are currently Vice Chair Marby Matos Rodriguez, Mel Huff, Mervyn Theodore, Wanda Ward, and Heather Wilson. And we do look forward to other members of the new class on the board joining us on this committee. I'd also like to welcome other NSB members who have joined us, including Willie and some of our other members I hope will tune in. I'd ask staff to note in the minutes that the committee and the board members are present at this meeting so that we can follow them and share information. The purpose of today's meeting is to hear from NSF Chief Science Officer Karen Marangel about the agency's plans and timeline for developing the 2026 to 2030 strategic plan. The time is about right, 10:02 for us to get started. But before turning to Karen for her discussion and presentation and introduction of the process of what's going on, what they will be doing as they develop the plan, I'd like to say a few words about the federal agency strategy plans and why NSB's engagement with NSF on its next strategic plan is essential. Since 1993, federal agencies have been mandated to develop quadrennial strategic plans that address the agency's mission and to establish goals and to set objectives against which agencies measure their progress and their performance and how they address specific national problems. Strategic plans for federal agencies are thus much more than messaging documents per se. They guide the agency strategy. They budget and point directions to budget priorities and annual performance management frameworks under which they operate, under which they are measured and considered. Strategy, budget, and performance targets are, of course, the foci of our committee's face towards the agency. So our goal is not to get in the weeds of the plan, but to look at this as from an overall higher view. NSB's engagement on the plan is also crucial because of our unique perspective on the broader S&E landscape, which stems from our work on science and engineering indicators and our other role as an advisor to the White House and an advisor to Congress on science and engineering and its policies and goals that are developed for the benefit of the American people. The strategic plan development process, thus, is an opportunity to bring us together in our two roles, giving us the chance every few years to consider what it means to pursue NSF's mission in an evolving national and international science and engineering landscape. And this upcoming strategic planning cycle is particularly timely in light of efforts of this board to fulfill document our thinking in the Vision 2030 and in the context of the changing science and technology landscape and emergent connected horizon era that we face, which the board has recently articulated in several briefs. All of these three documents are in the board's website and in the Diligent book. And I encourage interested members of the public to read them, as well as the new members of our board. I'll say more about this later in the meeting after we hear from Karen. So Karen, we look forward to hearing about the process that NSF will use and the timeline for developing the strategic plan over the next 18 months or so. So Karen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Roger, thank you so much. Great to see all of you, and a special welcome to Willie, Joan, Yolanda, and Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We have some slides prepared, and as Roger mentioned, and Roger, thank you for going through the history of the strategic planning process in the federal landscape. I'm going to touch on that as well. But our intent today is really to give you all an overview of how we plan to engage with the Committee on Strategy and with the full board as we are developing the strategic plan. And as you might imagine, we have many touch points throughout the next 18 months, both with NSF staff internally and with the public, and you are a very important part of those touch points. So I'm gonna take some pauses today because some of this information will be new to some of you, and want to make sure that we have a ripe opportunity to answer any of the questions that you have. I also want to point out that on the line today from NSF are members of our organizational performance team and our long-term planning team, and also the evidence and assessment capability team. And these staff members here at NSF are really important to this work and are working with me to coordinate this agency-wide effort. And so you'll be interacting with them over the course of the next year to 18 months. So again, I want to stress that we are at the very early stages of the plan's development. And so our focus has been on really building out the structures to ensure that we're well positioned as an agency to build this the strategic plan, this important tool moving forward. So let's go on to the next slide. I just want to review the agenda today. So want to provide some background information on the process to develop the strategic plan and the companion learning agenda. And I'm going to place this within the NSF framework and the federal context. I'm going to discuss our plans and timeline for our engagements with you and others, and then bring you up to speed on some of the preliminary work that we have already done to prepare for the strategic plan development. It's important that you have the grounding in some of the key concepts, especially those that Roger's alluded to, as we engage in developing this over the course of the year, and some of where our guardrails are and what's expected of us from the White House and others as we develop this plan. So let's move to the next slide. I'm going to take an opportunity to actually take a step back for a moment, so that I can situate our vision and the director's vision for this year's strategic planning process and how it differs from and it has actually evolved from the processes that we have used in the past. 2 cycles ago, the work that NSF did complied with the OMB requirements for the development of a strategic plan, as it always does. But there was also parallel activity going on within the agency around strategic efforts. And we really, as we looked back, viewed those parallel activities as more independent and not really connected to the NSF process. In the most recent strategic planning cycle, so the strategic planning cycle that we use to develop the strategic plan that has guided us since 2022 and will expire in 2026, we worked explicitly towards more convergence of the strategy outlined in the federal plan and the NSF vision. So for example, we incorporated NSF's 3 pillars and the priorities from NSV's Vision 2030. And so we were working towards more convergence. That we felt like we took a good step, but we want to go even further. And so in this current cycle of strategic planning, we want this to represent more full integration of the strategic plan with our NSF efforts. So we're looking to outline a single strategy and tailoring that single strategy for different audiences and different uses. So the strategic plan, we really want this to be something that is a working document for us, something that just doesn't go up on our website and we report out as we're required to do to OMB, but something that is part of the fabric of what we're doing at NSF, even more so than it was in this last cycle. So that's our vision for this round of the strategic planning. Let's move on to the next slide. So I'm going to go through this slide and I'm going to take a pause to see if there are questions. So for the NSB members, the returning NSB members, this should look familiar, this slide, because we've used this in some previous meetings for the Committee on Strategy and for the board to really talk through our strategic planning environment and our budget environment and how we've been developing our framework to knit all of this together. So we've talked about this with regard to the budget, the roadmap strategy, and incorporating some of our organizational performance work. I'll start with the highest level. So on the very top horizontal line there, we have these high level visioning documents that inform our priorities across the agency's work. And I've mentioned these previously. So of course, our mission and our vision are our core values, but the 3 pillars of NSF that the director has described, the NSB Vision 2030, and then of course, congressional administration priorities impact and feed into all the work that we do. These visioning documents that inform our strategic plan and the companion learning agenda, and we'll of course be centering on that during this talk today. And then we have also worked on a set of implementation-focused documents, including the individual directorate and office plans that direct specific action in line with budget goals, as well as our cross-agency roadmaps. And as you all know, we've been working very hard on those roadmaps to fill that gap between the strategy and the operations. And then finally, we have annual plans and reports, such as the budget and annual performance plan that track progress against the strategic plan goals and our objectives. And the outputs from those annual processes, the budget, the annual evaluation plan, feed into our long-term planning and implementation, and that's represented there on this slide by the gold feedback arrow on the right. So we really want those documents at the granular level, at the output level, to feed back into our strategic planning and learning agenda. So let me just pause here and see if there are any questions on this slide.
Please use your raise hand function in the program. Seeing none, Karen.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Let's go on to the next slide then. So I want to get straight to it and talk through our proposed engagement points. And we welcome your feedback on this, but this is kind of what we have envisioned over the next year or so. So we want to engage with you all often and early so that we can work together and incorporate your feedback most effectively. And we have a great track record of doing that. So we have outlined here numerous touch points throughout the process to discuss some of the key domains that we should focus on in the next strategic plan. So for instance, we may be thinking about the roadmaps. Since we have those 4, we've been working hard at developing those roadmaps. Certainly that's going to be a big piece of our thinking around how we incorporate those into the next strategic plan. And then the strategies that we want to really rely on to allow for the greatest impact for NSF. It will also provide you all with an opportunity for both this committee and the full board to discuss deliverables before they're finalized. And that's really important that we get your feedback before anything's finalized. So this shows kind of what we are envisioning, starting with the kickoff here on the left. I'm not going to go through all of these touch points, but you'll see kind of the regular cadence of how we anticipate interacting with you and around what particular topics throughout the next year until we get through to February 2026 with the final rollout. So let me pause here and just see if there's any immediate question or feedback on this proposed timeline.
it's a pretty tight timeline. Karen, are there any choke points? I mean, just keep us informed of where there might be choke points that might delay as you go through. Thanks.
Okay, we'll do that for sure. All right, let's move on to the next slide. The next couple of slides, I want to provide a little bit of background, especially if you're not familiar with the purposes of a federal strategic plan. So as I mentioned in the opening, our goal here is to not think about this as a separate activity that we have to do to check a box for OMB. We know we need to do this in a particular way. So OMB dictates to us the process by which we need to follow for the strategic plan, but we want to make this a strategic plan that that really embodies the work of NSF and embodies where we're heading to over the next 4 years. So really making it fully integrated into our work here at NSF. As a federal agency, we do follow the White House and the Office of Management and Budget guidance to develop our strategic plan, and ultimately they need to approve this and sign off on it. So we do have touch points with the Office of Management and Budget throughout as well, and it will culminate in a submission and a presentation to them, which they will then approve or give us feedback on. At the start of each presidential term, as Roger mentioned, all federal agencies begin the process of developing and refining their goals, objectives, and strategies to measure and ensure that they align with the aspirations of each administration. So it is important to also note that NSF is not the only federal agency doing this. This is an activity that all the federal agencies are engaging with. This is the guidance from OMB that is provided to agencies on the purpose of the strategic plans. And so OMB has given us the guidance that the strategic plan should serve 4 distinct but related purposes. On the leadership level, which is here on the top, the strategic plan should communicate the administration and agency priorities. And the administration will provide our agency with input on the strategic plan development to ensure that it aligns with the commitments made by the president and by the NSF director. Moving down to planning, the strategic plan needs to provide direction for programmatic and management planning. And then this serves as the basis for building our budget. And it should be clear on the strategies that we will implement to achieve our goals and objectives. And again, kind of, I think here back to that ecosystem slide or the environment within which we're planning, where we see budget as a direct outcome of the strategy work that we do. And as you know, the director has really been shining a bright light on ensuring that our budget is following the strategy. Around management, the strategic plan needs to guide implementation and management in many areas, including the agency's performance, our human capital goals. And as a management tool, the strategic plan should provide a clear line of sight from the director's goals to the staff implementing our program. So again, that's from goals to budget to program implementation. And it's important through this that we link our organizational performance objectives to the individual performance of different parts of the agency to ensure that we're all moving in the same direction. And then finally, the strategic plan should serve as an engagement tool. So we are viewing this as an excellent tool to engage our staff. In particular, this is actually part of our cultural framework for improving the efficacy of our work environment for our staff. But this is also an engagement tool for our research community and our other external partners to ensure that we receive their input and then share with them our aspirations as an agency. At the very bottom, you'll see this footnote that the OMB guidance on strategic planning is included in this OMB circular. So if you have some free time and have a desire to read this very detailed document, or maybe you need you need some reading material to help you sleep, I urge you to go take a look at that. But it is very detailed. We have it here for your reference in case you want to learn more. and we do, I'd also just one more note on this. That circular provides the general guidance, but the format of the plan can change and has actually over the years. And so we expect the format to change with this next plan, and I'll say a little bit more about that. So let's move to the next slide. As I mentioned, in the federal context, the strategic plan has a companion learning agenda, which I actually find this to be really, really interesting. That we are required to do this, that all federal agencies are required to do this. I think this has been an excellent addition to the strategic planning process. So a learning agenda is also sometimes referred to as a strategic evidence building plan. And it's a new component or relatively new component of the agency's strategic planning process. This strategic plan that we're currently working on for fiscal year 26 to 2030 will be only the second time that we have a companion learning agenda for NSF. It was required under the Evidence Act that was passed in 2018. So this is a relatively new concept. In short, the learning agenda does three things. It outlines some key questions whose answers will enable the agency to more effectively and efficiently meet our mission, our vision, our goals, and the objectives that are described in the strategic plan. So it prompts us to answer some of those key questions through evidence building, doing things such as landscape surveys, even experimental and quasi-experimental studies and pilots, and then analyses such as evaluations, policy studies, and program evaluations. And then it provides a framework for those answers to allow continuous assessment of our strategies and our process towards our goals. And these are the types of things that we would bring to and discuss in our regular course of leadership meetings within the agency. So we're constantly looking at how work from our learning agenda is informing how we think we're doing, progressing towards our goals, and if we need to make some course corrections. The second purpose of the learning agenda is that it must be developed in tandem with the strategic plan through an integrated process because it covers the same time period. So you're going to see that as we are developing the strategic plan, we are simultaneously developing the learning agenda. So you're going to hear about both parts of these as we engage with you throughout the year. And then finally, OMB does expect that we will carry out the activities described in the learning agenda and that we'll publicly release findings in a timely fashion. So there is a level of accountability and transparency that is expected, and that, of course, we will meet. And again, the link to the OMB guidance on the learning agenda is provided here, again, in that same circular, different section, in case you'd like to learn more about that. So let me just pause there. Again, these two slides were meant to describe just some of the expectations and the components that are required under the federal development of a strategic plan and learning agenda. And let me just pause to see if there are questions at this point on any of that.
Karen, are there any required deadlines or checkpoints that you have to report out to the OMB mid-course or in the interim?
Yes, there are. Can I call on someone from the performance team? So yeah, we actually have a regular cadence of reporting. Okay. And yeah, there's a website that all the agencies report into.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Karen, I can add some more context to that. So Roger, in terms of the steps for the strategic plan, so we do have a few touch points. In the May timeframe, late May timeframe, we do have to provide the goals, draft goals and objectives. And then in September with the OMB submission, we'll provide the draft plan. So OMB will get a chance to review and then provide us feedback, usually in the late November, early December timeframe, before we publish. And then after that, to Karen's point about connections back to performance, we will do regular checks throughout the annual cycle. So we have an annual strategic objective review that we complete, that we report out to OMB on an annual basis in the summer.
Thanks, Jason. Thank you, Jason. Any other comments? Thank you. Marby.
So I was wondering, okay, so you have kind of like a fabric of documentation that really helps you understand where you're going, right? Like the strategic plan, the learning agenda, and now the roadmaps too. How do you expect, from your experience that these three elements will be or will guide how the portfolio is constructed within NSF? How do you use that information to guide what you invest on?
Yeah, so it will really come out most strongly during the budget process. So the roadmaps, as we're kind of driving towards finalizing the first round of those, we have priorities. We're setting priorities within each of the roadmaps, and we've already started thinking about, okay, as we're preparing for the fiscal 27 budget development, how do we now start to attach real dollar amounts to those those components of the roadmaps? So we're kind of doing this simultaneously with developing the strategic plan, and that speaks to that, like, those roadmaps are going to have to, in my view, have to feed into the strategic plan in some way. We will need to get, I think, the administration guidance on those roadmaps will be very important, because we need to ensure that they're aligning with the new administration's goals. But Marvi, it really is through I see it operationally through the budgeting process that those roadmaps will create the link from the strategic plan down to how budget gets allocated, and then how programs are developed, implemented, and then followed up on.
Thanks, Karen.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's it, Karen. Next.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Let's move on to the next slide. So we have been doing a lot of work over the last several months, actually, to prepare for the new strategic plan development process, and we have sorry. So I want to share with you some of the preparatory work that we have done. In the spring of 2024, so just this past spring, we convened a working group to really try to lay out what our processes and principles for strategic planning. And the group identified three key areas of recommendation to enhance the strategic planning process. And these are the three that you see on the screen. So first, a set of guiding principles were developed based on lessons learned from past strategic plan development and some of the promising practices that have emerged out of our past process. A plan for internal and external engagement through an inclusive process to ensure that all voices are heard, and to share what we've incorporated into our strategic plan so that we're able to close the communication loop with those that we solicit feedback and ideas from. And then the final recommendation was to improve our data and measurement of the plan's goals and objectives. We want to be proactive in metrics development with this strategic plan. It's certainly something we've talked with this committee. The board has been a very strong proponent of ensuring that we have solid metrics developed, and that we're being proactive about developing those and then reporting out on them. So these are the principles that were identified and that we will be using to move forward. So the 6 guiding principles, to follow up on the first point from the last slide, these are the 6 strategic plan guiding principles that we'll be putting into place. In the plan development, we're committing to transparency in the process and the inclusive engagement of our various communities. We've built out a process to ensure that we're gathering and sharing information both internal to the agency and externally. And that sharing does include that feedback loop of looping back with communities so that they can understand how feedback was incorporated into the plan. Our goal is to create a plan that is clear and concise. I want to underscore this because this was a very important part for me personally in our pre-planning. This can't be, everything under the sun. We really have to be targeted in what we're putting into this plan so that we have a realistic roadmap for the next 4 years. So this will allow for some integration and alignment with the other related initiatives, as we've mentioned, budget, performance, etc. So we are really aiming for a strategic or for a streamlined plan that will serve as a management tool in addition to giving us the guidance on our goals and objectives. And then finally, we want the plan to be both an accountability mechanism for meaningful action towards our goals, as well as flexible and adaptable to allow the pursuit of potentially transformative ideas from the community in the future. We know that we can't predict what the state of science will be in 4 years from now, but we do have some ideas about what we need to pay attention to and where we want to go. But we know that it's best to be open to being able to take turns and course corrections along the way, should major events dictate that for us. So we want to be clear on setting these expectations for what we plan to achieve, having the responsibility to ensure that we are achieving those, but creating that space for new events, resources, or legislation that might come our way. Let's move on to the next slide. So the types of engagements that we are planning, in the spring working group that I just mentioned, they recommended additional engagement of the NSF community beyond what we have done in previous cycles. And so we're thinking about the NSF community as our NSF staff and the research community more broadly, along with other federal agencies. And so this fall, we are going to host staff engagements. So engagements with our internal NSF staff, including live input sessions and an online survey that are going to ask staff to weigh in on the vision, values, and the opportunities and challenges for NSF's future. Additional engagement points will occur throughout the plan's development and as part of our implementation. And then the White House, OMB, and Congress are other key constituencies with whom we will engage at key defined points throughout the process. Let me pause there and see if there are questions. I'm not sure if something came in through the chat. Oh.
Sorry, Marvi.
I do have a question. It occurred to me that within the board, there has been a lot of discussion on the changing landscape, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does this mean when it comes to R&D investments? When it comes, and where does that investment comes from? Like the federal government, industry, and other maybe philanthropy and so on. One question that I have is, how do you foresee that this changing landscape will impact the way in which we construct a strategic plan and a learning agenda? Do you see it impacted in any way? How do we actually maybe learn from it and take that as an input?
Oh, it's such a great question, Marvi. So I think it will be an opportunity lost if we are not attending to the changing landscape. I mean, things in science, things in our everyday lives, things are changing so rapidly that I don't think we can predict what science is going to look like necessarily in 4 years. I think we are going to see great changes. This is why having a plan that sets goals, but is also open to making corrections as we need, is going to be incredibly important in this plan, just because of the rapid impact of technological changes, most importantly. So that's going to need to be a big part of the learning agenda, that we're attending to how things are changing and ensuring that what about our processes are allowing us to adapt to the changes, and what about our processes are inhibiting from adapting to changes quickly. So yes, 100%. And I mean, none of us have this worked out. I think this is exactly the type of great discussion that we want to engage with all of you on, because we do need goals to drive toward, but we absolutely have to be open to how quickly things are changing.
Thank you.
Karen, could I just add one other item there too? So we are doing an environmental scan within NSF to look at the broader landscape. And one of the questions is, over the next 4 to 5 years, what are the factors that NSF needs to consider in addition to the changing science and technology environment? We also have to consider, the economic environment, the cultural environment, other factors that will inform how we move forward. So there are a lot of other pieces there too. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Sure. Right.
And then Joan had a question in the chat about the
sorry,
guiding.
Joan.
Oh,
Yes, please.
Yes, thanks. Very new to all of this, so not wanting to distract the discussion. But Karen, could you go back to the slide that talked about the, I think it was the guiding principles,
yeah.
please? Just quickly, I took those to be, those. I took those to be partly principles that would guide the work of the development of the plan and considerations as the plan is being put together, but those aren't yet necessarily the major principles that will be embodied in the plan itself, right?
That's
You
correct.
talked a little bit about that, staying attention to the changing context of science and so forth. That might show up in a different way, but I just wanted to be clear. So it's the principles for the development and consideration of them as we go.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct,
Thank
Joan.
you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Sorry. Yep.
No, these are great questions.
All right, shall we move forward?
Sure. Okay, so data and measurement principles. So I wanted to spend just a little bit of time sharing our early thinking about data and measurement. So as you know, we're going to be developing the strategic plan and then simultaneously developing the key measures to support our progress. And so we're going to approach this in a couple of ways. First, we want to identify our existing data resources and design a plan to really make use of our existing data resources. Now, we recognize that we may need to draw on or develop new tools to get at proper measurement, but really looking to identify those existing data resources is going to be very important. We want to be in a position where we have measures readily available to inform our goals and objectives when we publish in winter 2026. So this does give us a ramp to, if we do need to get some things stood up, this is giving us a ramp to be able to start to implement on any new tools or data sources that we might need. And then we want to ensure that we're leveraging the learning agenda to help us develop other evidence to inform decisions on especially our program strategy. So these are the principles that we're using, particularly as we're developing that learning agenda. And again, let me just pause here to see if there are questions on that. Okay, and then we'll move on. I think this is the final slide. So I just want to shift focus and talk about the structure that we put in place to develop the strategic plan. So this is kind of just getting into some of the nuts and bolts internally within NSF. So I serve as chair of the governance board for the strategic plan and the learning agenda development. And as I mentioned at the very start, I'm supported by key colleagues in leadership roles throughout the agency, in particular leadership roles that are relevant to planning, strategy, and operations. We're supported as a governance board in our decision-making by an advisory board of assistant directors, office heads, and their deputies. And then all of the work that I've discussed today, so all the planning that has happened since the spring, the principles development, all of that has been staffed by a project team led by our Deputy Performance Improvement Officer, who's Jason Bosey, who you heard from today. And the members who fill out that project team span NSF strategy, organizational performance, communications, evaluation, program expertise, and more. And so once we define our strategic goals and objectives, then we'll stand up strategic objective teams that will then guide the measures and the learning agenda questions. So this just gives you, I just wanted to share this to give you a sense of what this is looking like internally as we're developing this, and it takes a lot of people. So hopefully you can see that. And I think that is all of the slides that we had for today. So love to hear your reactions, any further questions or feedback that you have for us at this point.
Thanks very much, Karen. Jason, would you leave that last slide on just so we can see it while we engage the next round of questions? Karen, you very nicely laid out the plan or the process to get to a plan. Are there any other additional questions that any of you have? I'm glad to see all the input from the advisories that are part of this, and it's not that the duties are or the activities are done by specialists in each of those categories. I'm glad that someone like Jason's involved as well to keep everything moving.
I am too.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions from anyone? Yes, Yolanda, please.
Hi, this was fantastic and very helpful. Thank you. It's a very thorough process, and I agree that there's a lot of work there, and it's a very optimistic timeline, but that's what we should strive for. My question is that I didn't see anywhere the input from the NSF directorates, advisory committees, specifically trying to express that the community has a say in this strategic planning. So I imagine it is there. I know for a fact that NSF staff are very much in tune with the community and really do a lot of different forms of connection, outreach, engagement, and of course are aware of what the advisory committees say. But it might be useful to have that expressed explicitly in some of this material. I think, in terms of communication and also in terms of clarity.
Yes, thank you. And absolutely, the advisory committees are a key piece of this. So we will be engaging with the advisory committees throughout this process. We also have multiple touch points with them where we solicit their feedback. We come back to them. They have a process of providing us both written and verbal feedback that we'll be taking into consideration and then looping back with them. So yes, thank you. It was not meant to be an explicit exclusion, and they are very, very important part of providing feedback on this, I can assure you.
I should have mentioned earlier, we welcome Dr. Gill and Dr. May and Dr. Farini Mundi to our board. Thank you all for joining us in this call this morning. Are there any other new members on board at the meeting? Do appreciate that you've taken this opportunity to learn more about what we do in the CS. Dr. May, you had a question?
Yes. To what extent might we expect changes in this planning process due to the wants, desires of the new administration?
So and anytime we embark on the planning process, we know that the administration will want to put their stamp on it. So I think it's a normal part of the process. It's something that the process anticipates. It's hard for us to know right now what some of those changes might be, but or directions that they'll give us will be, but they'll be clearly communicating that with us, and we'll certainly be sharing that with you.
Okay.
Thanks, Karen. As we recall, we hope that we have a science advisor in the OSTP relatively early in the administration, Willie. And last time around, it was a relatively long time between until a new OSTP head was named. So we're hopeful that this time it'll be a little bit differently with the new planning process that's in place. Other questions or comments? Karen, thank you very much. We appreciate hearing from you, and we will hear more from you as we go along in these meetings, I'm sure, according to your schedule. We're excited to hear about the directions, and we're excited to learn about the role that the hard work going into the strategic planning process will incorporate the road mapping process that you're engaged in. I know it's a lot. We know it's a lot of work by you and your staff, and we appreciate the effort and look forward to the learnings that go on between one and the other, how they affect other components. And appreciate that you've asked for questions throughout. Unless there's something new, additional questions, we'll move on to the closure. Seeing no hands, as I mentioned earlier, the development of the 2026 to 2030 strategic planning process is timely. It's especially timely because we have a new administration to listen to. We have a new Congress to listen to. We will have new inputs from different constituencies than perhaps we've had in the past. We are now almost halfway to 2030, making this a good time to take stock of our progress towards a vision that we imagined as we developed the vision several years ago. And that vision is for the U.S. Economy, and how science and engineering is laid out in this report will help us to know where we are in our own planning of the 2030 report. And it will give us an opportunity to look at 2030, a vision 2030, to see how that might need to be adapted accordingly. And there are also the changed science and technology landscape issues that were mentioned by Marvi and which we've all become familiar with. 3 key features of the changed landscape will most likely be part of the background against which your work will be done. We're very pleased to see that you are taking that into account already. Marvi has introduced this topic a few minutes ago. First, business R&D funding has risen dramatically. If you've looked at the SEI, the indicators and some of the graphs there, with an accelerating growth rate. It's not flattened out. It's continued to increase and become an increasing proportion of the total R&D investment across the U.S. How will this impact on specific goals and programs? How should the research and education community adapt to that changing landscape? How will universities and other constituencies react according to the way that landscape, as we see it at the NSF and the NSB, affect what the academic community or our research constituency does? Second, it's clear that the U.S. leadership in science and engineering is eroding. That's not a bad thing. Better science around the globe is a good thing. But in part, we have in addition, we have this recognition that in part, this challenge that we have is China's rising investment in science and technology. It's a great thing. But how and where will the R&D community and the private sector focus those efforts, their own efforts, as a consequence of the changing landscape in other countries, in other of the competitive R&D countries that we are aware of? Being aware of how the change in industry funding for R&D is morphing over the course of the next 10 years will impact on how the U.S. R&D is done and what our focus is. Third, the number of jobs that require STEM skills is rapidly increasing. That's clear. But more so in some areas and less so in other specific areas. And these different areas require different levels of knowledge and skills training accordingly. We recognize that to be the case. How does the NSF adapt to that changing need for different types of STEM education in how it prepares the workforce for the future? Given these broader transformations in the SN ecosystem, I think it critical as we embark on NSF's next strategic plan that the board discuss the implications of the changed landscape for NSF and answer the questions: how should NSF respond? And where should NSF be in 2030 and beyond? To that end, I'd like to hold a committee on strategy meeting next month to consider how NSF should respond to the changing science and engineering landscape, or suggestions about what might be useful, and where we'd like to see NSB at the end of this current cycle of planning of the roadmap in 2030. So we see this as a big picture conversation, and it's an important input by the board into the strategic plan and its planning process. that will complement NSF strategic agency-wide environmental scan, which involves lots of great feedback that Karen has already mentioned as they develop the plan. So our input, we hope, will be valuable to the planning process that you're doing now. But to wrap up, I want to thank Karen and your staff, and of course, Panch and Nimi, would you please send back our gratitude for the work that Panch is doing in this process as well. And we welcome this continuing and ongoing collaboration between the committee and the NSF. I believe the process of developing the 2026 to 2030 strategic plan will be useful for both the agency and the board, and look forward to continuing productive engagements. And before closing, always, the CS is grateful to the work of the NSBO staff in support of the work of the committee. In this case, Elise Lipkowitz and Michelle McCracken. Thank you both for helping the CS do its job and being in good connection with Karen and other members of the NSF team. As we have no further business to discuss, this concludes the open session of the Committee on Strategy.